All right, this is part 2 of the Project 2025 video. And in this video, we're actually going to go ahead and read the document. The first video, there are some things that I just kind of talked about loosely regarding what we're going to see rise next year. I also talked about why it's important for us to be paying attention to what is going on in the United States. It's not because I'm in the United States or because I'm ethnocentric and I think that everything revolves around the country that I live in. It's because the United States is the false prophet of Revelation 13. And it has two functions. One is to testify to the Antichrist, and the other is to set up the image of the Antichrist, which the United States has done. So it is important for us to be paying attention to what happens in this country. It's also important for us to be paying attention to what's going on in the West in general, because the 10 horns that are 10 kings represent the 10 Germanic tribes that became Western Europe. It's also important that you continue to remember that whatever you're seeing happening with the left right now is crazy, it's bonkers, it's dishonest. Just like 2 years ago, it was crazy and bonkers and dishonest that, the trans community was saying, you want me to unalive myself because you don't believe in my ideology, and they were pushing their agenda and everything else. And the right, particularly the Christian right, were like, this is crazy, and those pagans this and pagans that, thinking that pagans are the enemy, not recognizing that counterfeit Christianity in the Bible is the actual Antichrist. That's who God is most upset about. And so you fast forward 2 years later, and this group of counterfeit Christians are worshiping this image of the Antichrist that is counterfeit Israel, set up by the United States. I mean, this is textbook, Revelation 13, read it. And this group of counterfeit Christians, Christian nationalists, Christian Zionists, Jewish Zionists, what are they saying? If you disagree with their ideology, you're calling for the annihilation of Jews. And they don't see the irony in that. They don't see the hypocrisy in that. So you might be seeing certain things right now, such as censorship in media and the criminalization of free speech, journalists being called terrorists because they dare to speak against Israel, or maybe they're not even speaking against Israel, maybe they just support Palestinians. And all of a sudden they're terrorists. So you hear the right talking about these things. You hear counterfeit Christianity talking about these things and condemning them, but you also see the hypocrisy of them doing exactly the same thing when they get the opportunity. And when they're confronted on it, they act like it's a different situation, like it's okay for them, but it's not okay for other people to engage in these behaviors that were so obviously and blatantly crazy 2 years ago. So when they come into power, and they will, next year they most certainly will. I know that for a fact because I know what I'm doing and I know how many days I'm supposed to do it. And I know that when I'm done doing it, that the Antichrist is going to rise from the abyss, overpower and kill the witnesses, and I'll go down at that time. So I know exactly when, well, I don't know exactly when that's going to happen. I know exactly when I'm done with my testimony. Your job is not to just believe everything I say at face value. Your job is to go back and discern that with God. So all of this I tell you because I think that right now it might be a little bit difficult to envision that counterfeit Christianity will be doing this next year. Right now you might see the left in power and think that these sorts of behaviors are specific to this political group. But see, that's the issue, is you can't make this a political issue. It's not a political issue. It's an issue of the spirit that's occupying them. And you need to look at the description of the rest of the Antichrist so that you can understand what group is actually going to rise. This is not a group of pagans that are going to trample, or at least self-proclaimed pagans, who are going to trample God's people. It is those claiming to be Jews, though they are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan, Revelation 3:9. It is those claiming to be Christian. The Antichrist kingdom in Daniel 2 started with papal Rome, and it has grown. It has grown to include not only papal Rome, which established counterfeit Christianity after Jesus died and rose to go home to the Father. And it continues in the prostitutes that bore out of her, Revelation 17. And it continues in this image of the Antichrist that this kingdom of counterfeit Christianity is worshiping. And they worship it as though it's their Messiah. That they believe that this is a group of people, an ethnic group that is going to bear their covenant for them, and that they're the ones who are going to be persecuted and killed by the Antichrist. But here's the irony. Read Revelation 13. Revelation 13 tells us that the false prophet of the United States is going to create this image of the Antichrist, which they have done. And that it's also going to give breath to the image of the Antichrist so that it's able to persecute and kill God's people. And as you read on, not only is this the persecuting power, but it is the persecuting power that is requiring people to worship it and receive its mark. Where do you receive the mark? In your heart. So if you drink the Kool-Aid, if you ingest this doctrine, then you have received the mark of the beast. And that is the image of the Antichrist that actually does that. Okay, so we're going to go to this document. The document is called Mandate for Leadership. So if you'd like, and you should do your due diligence to read whatever God brings you to or follow along with me. But it's the 2025 Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. And the thing that God has put on my heart to look up is every context in which religious freedom is mentioned, because there is what your definition of religious freedom is going to mean can mean something very different from what counterfeit Christianity believes religious freedom is. And you're going to see that there is language in here that is going to, that's very subtle, but it's going to indicate that there's more religious freedom for particular groups than for others, or that the priority for religious freedom is more important for this group than it is for other groups. You're also going to see that there are certain definitions that condemn or malign other religious groups. So I've only actually read very little of this document, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at that. So on page 185, this is the second context of religious freedom. The first is in the I think it's in the table of contents or something like that. So it's not relevant to us. So some of these I'm going to skip over if they're not relevant. On page 185, it says, the U.S. cannot neglect a concern for human rights and minority rights, which must be balanced with strategic and security considerations. Special attention must be paid to challenges of religious freedom, especially the status of Middle Eastern Christians. Okay, so religious freedom for everyone except probably if it interferes with Middle Eastern Christians and other religious minorities, as well as the human trafficking endemic to the region. This is like kind of a bizarre paragraph. I was like, what? What are we talking about? You have religious freedom and then you have human trafficking. Like, maybe separate that a little and elaborate. I mean, these seem to be two different issues that we're talking about. Why is it in the same paragraph or in the same context or bullet point? It's kind of weird. And it seems like what they're trying to do is imply that or conflate Islam with human trafficking. But so then I, look up, what does Islam have to say about human trafficking? Islam strongly condemns the exploitation of vulnerable individuals, which is at the core of human trafficking. But see, there seems to be an implication here and a conflation between Islam and human trafficking. That seems to be where they're going with this. So we'll just earmark it. Okay, the next one, bear with me because it's going to start on page 253 and continue on page 254, but I want to make sure that I read the entire context of this overview. U.S. aid was established during the presidency of John F. Kennedy, pursuant to the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 to promote the foreign policy, security, and national interests of the United States. At the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, it sought to halt the spread of communism by assisting peoples in the developing world in their efforts to advance economically, socially, and politically. The agency helped to transition Central and Eastern Europe from socialism to free market-based democracies. Today, U.S. aid leads the U.S. government's global development, and humanitarian disaster assistance responses. Over the years, USAID expanded the number of countries assisted, the scope and size of its activities, and especially its budget. Okay, let's just pause for a minute because the wording can get a little dense. Let's just pause and listen to what we've heard already, okay? It was established during the presidency of John F. Kennedy to promote the foreign policy, security, and national interests of the United States. Okay, the agenda of the United States, essentially. At the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, it sought to halt the spread of communism by assisting peoples in the developing world in their efforts to advance economically, socially, and politically. Okay, let me just translate that. The United States went around trying to make everybody have the government that they wanted them to have and set up different governments. Did they do that or not? Yes, they did. And here's a great reframe. The agency helped to transition Central and Eastern Europe from socialism to free market-based democracies. Okay, let's tell the truth. They've destroyed the United States has destroyed other governments, set up certain governments, and then gone in and said, oh, they're terrorists, when we know darn well that we had a hand in building that. And why was this? Because the United States testifies to the Antichrist, and the Antichrist of Papal Rome was taken down by communism, by Napoleon, and has ever since then been terrified that communism is going to rise again. This is also the reason why Pope Pius XI actually formed an alliance with Hitler, a concordat, because he believed that Hitler, who was anti-communist, would be able to keep Stalin from taking over Europe. That was the big fear of Papal Rome. That's why there's so much hoopla about this in the United States. And of course, later on, the United States took down communism. Mr. Gorbachev, take down that wall. So the United States is really doing its bidding while it hides out like a little coward until it's time for it to rise again. All right, it goes on to say, over the years, USAID expanded the number of countries assisted, the scope and size of its activities, and especially its budget. The Trump administration faced an institution marred by bureaucratic inertia, programmatic incoherence, wasteful spending, and dependence on huge awards to a self-serving and politicized aid industrial complex of United Nations agencies, international non-governmental organization, NGOs, and for-profit contractors. Once started, programs continue almost indefinitely in many countries for decades. USAID's multi-billion-dollar humanitarian programs that were once 80% in response to natural disasters are now 80% in response to violent, man-made crises and have become a permanent and immiserating feature of the global landscape. Okay, I don't know if you're noticing there's a lot of abstractions here. Like, I can kind of understand what they're talking about. They're supposedly resentful about all of the help that they're offering. But you know what's so dishonest about this is that the one place that most of our money is going to is Israel. And moreover, we don't go help a country unless there's something in it for us. So let's be honest about that. Unless we have some sort of interest. Anybody in Mexico trying to help over there? No, our government has allowed the cartel over here. But the United States was in the Middle East because they have certain interests in the Middle East, like oil or Israel. So are we being honest right here in this sentence? USAID's billion-dollar humanitarian programs, give me a break, how humanitarian, that were once 80% in response to natural disasters are now 80% in response to violent man-made crises and have become a permanent and immiserating feature of the global landscape. That's been the United States doing. We haven't gone in anywhere altruistically to go help people. There's always something in it for the big guy. Under the Trump administration, USAID focused on ending the need for foreign aid by placing countries onto a journey to self-reliance. The administration restructured the agency to reflect this strategic approach to development, streamlined procurement procedures to diversify its partner base, increased awards to cost-effective local, including faith-based organizations, and improved internal governance. It instituted pro-life and family-friendly policies. It promoted international religious freedom as a pillar of the agency's work and built up an unprecedented genocide response infrastructure. This is a joke. Is this a joke? Like, how can you even say that? Listen to the sentence. The administration restructured the agency to reflect this strategic approach to development, streamlined procurement procedures to diversify its partner base, increased awards to cost-effective local, including faith-based organizations, and improved internal governance. It instituted pro-life and family-friendly policies. It promoted, it's more than one sentence. I should have just gone to the one. It promoted international religious freedom. Unless you're a terrorist. Unless they've deemed you a terrorist. International religious freedom as a pillar of the agency's work and built up an unprecedented genocide response infrastructure. Excuse me, there's a genocide going on right now that we've been funding. What are you talking about? Religious freedom for me, but not for thee? That's a joke. Anyone with half a brain and any semblance of morality can see that there is not religious freedom for all groups. And if you think that it's not Christian for me to be, advocating for other groups to have religious freedom, you're wrong. Because Jesus didn't force anyone to accept him. Jesus didn't go around killing people or stealing their land because they didn't accept him. Let's talk about international religious freedom, page 261. Conservatives believe international religious freedom is central to U.S. aid's development efforts. President Trump's Executive Order 13926 on advancing international religious freedom instructed the Secretary of State, in consultation with the U.S. aid administrator, to budget at least $50 million a year for programs that advanced international religious freedom and ensure that faith-based and religious entities, including eligible entities in foreign countries, are not discriminated against on the basis of religious identity or religious belief when competing for federal funding. Again, I say to you, it's based on their definition. If they want to call you a terrorist because they don't agree with your religion or who you support or the things you say, then that's what they're going to do. So even within Christianity, if we were just talking about Christian religious freedom, like who cares about all those other people, right? All the other people who practice various religions, but Christian religious freedom. There are a lot of people calling themselves Christian who are not Christian. So by whose definition? Because the majority of people calling themselves Christian don't go by the definition of the Bible and the covenant that's laid out there. If they did, they wouldn't be supporting Zionism. They wouldn't be campaigning for the Antichrist through Christian nationalism. They wouldn't be worshiping the image of the beast that is counterfeit Israel. I don't want those people telling me the parameters by which I can practice so-called Christianity. That's going to be based on their definition. And anyone who is outside of that definition is going to be labeled a terrorist. So again, religious freedom for me, but not for thee. If in my religion of Christianity, of true Christianity, what I'm saying is, look, even in the Old Testament, if that's all you believe in as a, so-called Jew, do you not see that you're not allowed to steal, sodomize, rape, kill? Do you not see that? And then for Christians, those claiming to be Christian, in the New Testament, do you not see that God said that Christ said, you've heard it said that you are not allowed to murder, but anyone who harbors anger for a brother or sister in their heart has already committed murder in their heart. You are to pray for your enemies, love your enemies, give to those who ask of you, take care of the foreigner, turn the other cheek. I mean, these are all the things that he said. So why is so-called Christian Zionism, Christian nationalism, why are they supporting this? Last I checked, we weren't supposed to be supporting murder. We weren't supposed to be supporting people stealing land. We weren't supposed to be supporting sodomy and rape and saying, no, they can do whatever they want to prisoners of war. What? But that's exactly what's being said. That's exactly the narrative. So don't think for a second that this fluffy little language of religious freedom is going, oh, well, that I'm just so protected under that. You're not even protected under the Constitution right now. You don't have freedom of speech anymore in the United States. And you need to understand that that you can see as this document is written, as it stands right now, that there is language that is implying that there are certain people who are considered within this group of those who have religious freedom, and there are others who do not have religious freedom. This is according to their definition. And anyone who speaks to the contrary is going to be labeled a terrorist. How do I know? Because it's already happening. How do I know? Because it's been happening for many, many years. And we all drank the Kool-Aid here in the United States, but now God is bringing us out of these delusions and these lies and exposing what this has always been about. It's always been about this counterfeit Israel, this image of the Antichrist. Okay, so listen to this. Executive Order 13926 on advancing international religious freedom instructed the Secretary of State in consultation with the U.S. aid administrator to budget at least $50 million a year for programs that advance international religious freedom. Why? What does that money go to? And ensure that faith-based and religious entities, including eligible entities in foreign countries, are not discriminated against on the basis of religious identity or religious belief when competing for federal funding. Guys, come on. Give me a break. You think that Palestinians or Muslims are going to be able to come to the United States and they're going to be able to, they're not going to be discriminated on the basis of religious identity or religious belief? It's already happening. And the very fact that the United States keeps funding Israel to bomb and obliterate a certain group of people already tells you that there's not religious freedom, there's not equal religious freedom, and also that they're not going to make that a religious thing, because Zionism is not a religious thing to begin with. It's not Judaism. It's an ideology. It's also not an ethnic thing. So no one can really say, but the right keeps saying, oh, that you're racist if you don't agree with Zionism. No, I don't agree with your ideology. Just like 2 years ago, I didn't agree with trans ideology. That didn't mean that I wanted someone to unalive themselves any more than it means that now I want the evisceration or annihilation of a people. I simply do not agree with your ideology, and I'll sit with you and I'll show you what the Bible says. Can you do that with me? No, you can't. You can't justify anything. They cannot justify any of the things that they're doing right now in the name of Judaism. They're liars. So not only are these people not religious, and so they shouldn't be protected under religious freedom, this is ideology, but how's this for hypocrisy? On the other end of things, those who they don't like, those who they don't agree with, or those whom they want to exploit and take their land, they just label them terrorists. Well, I read to you what Islam believes. Islam does not believe in these things that they're being accused of, that they're being maligned about. Just because you have a group of people within Islam who are committing terrorist acts does not make Islam a terrorist group, any more than having a group of people who call themselves Christian who are supporting a genocide and who are going to rise next year, and you're going to see just how nasty they can get. You can't say that that represents true Christianity. Just like you can't say that Zionism represents Judaism. Because all three of those religions are not supposed to murder. Like, that's fundamentally inherent to the religion. So if people don't follow their religion, then they're not part of that religion, are they? But what happens in the United States is that doesn't get delineated. It doesn't get teased out. Like what group? It's just like all Islam, all Arabs, they're all terrorists. Anyone who speaks against Israel, all terrorists. So this is a lie. I mean, look at the fruit. Test the fruit with what you're reading here. Under the Trump administration, the agency set up a senior-level chief advisor for international religious freedom who reported directly to the administration with the task of coordinating a whole of U.S. aid approach to achieving this priority. It created a robust genocide response capability. USAID affirmed the agency's partnerships with faith-based organizations through its rule on participation by religious organizations in USAID programs. Partnership guidance and answers to frequently asked questions to faith-based organizations, and legal guidance and answers to FAQs for USAID staff. Today, U.S. aid officials, I mean, they say a lot of words and really don't say much. I mean, isn't that what they say about Kamala Harris, who they're not wrong, but they do the same thing. Today, U.S. aid officials and their progressive partners have resisted efforts to promote religious freedom, especially as it relates to abortion and gender ideology, which are anathema. Anathema. Anathema is a Jewish Zionist concept. So that's interesting that they use that word, which are anathema to the traditional societies where USAID funds programs in addition to many U.S. taxpayers. I don't know. This is a wordy document. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken repudiated his predecessor's focus on religious freedom. The next conservative administration must champion the core American value of religious freedom. How is that a core American value? Give me a break. I mean, this group does not stand for core American values of religious freedom, whatever that is, if that was ever an American value, because all they do is change the language around and change the definitions around, and then they can go and persecute any group they want in the name of terrorism when you know darn well this is about religious ideology. The next conservative administration must champion the core American value of religious freedom, which correlates significantly with poverty reduction, economic growth, and peace. Peace. Interesting. Stand for war, but talk about peace. That's weird. It should train all U.S. aid staff on the connection between religious freedom and development, integrated into all of the agency's programs, including the 5-year country development and coordination strategies due for updates in 2025, strengthen the mission's relationship with local faith-based leaders, and build on local programs that are serving the poor. Congress should appropriate funding to USAID specifically to support persecuted religious minorities. Hello, who do you think they're going to support? Palestinians? I don't think so. To support persecuted religious minorities in line with Executive Order 13926. So obviously this is talking about Israel. It's never talking about anybody else but Israel. Blank check support. Man, I don't know how we're going to get through this document. There's 26 mentions of religious freedom. We're on the 6th one right now. And they literally haven't really said anything. I don't know if we're even going to get through the whole thing. I think the bottom line is it's like whatever their definition of religious freedom is or religion, they can create a definition around that, which is also what the Antichrist did the first time. They created a definition around what being a Christian was, and then they killed everybody else. And the definition was based on Catholicism. It was based on this counterfeit Christian doctrine of the harlot Catholic Church. And also, like, you should understand that Revelation 3:9 says, I'm going to make those who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan, bow down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. So in essence, what he's saying is there are these counterfeits who are going to be persecuting you. And in the end, when I come, they're going to bow down to you and acknowledge that you're actually the chosen people when they've been saying that they're the chosen people all this time. And then in Revelation 13, you see that this image of the Antichrist is the one who kills and persecutes God's people. So this is all about narrative making, and you should be able to see it already in this document after, 4 or 5 references, that's exactly what they're doing. And if you look at their fruit, you can see that the rules are not the same across the board. I think it's even noteworthy that, well, first of all, that they said especially Middle Eastern Christians. I don't know what that's all about. Because if what you're trying to imply is equal religious freedom, equal religious protection for every group, there should be no especially for anybody. It should just be across the board, everyone has religious freedom. That statement right there is telling me you have a deeper agenda that you're not sharing. And secondly, there is this implication that there's, when you say religious freedom, that you're saying like there's equal religious freedom for everybody, but they never actually use that language. And I think that's a little suspicious, don't you think? Those two contexts right there, and given the fruit of what they've been bearing this whole time with regard to Israel and then the double standard for Palestinians or Islam, it tells me where they're going with this. It tells me that this is absolutely Antichrist mentality and what the Antichrist did the first time that it rose. All right, this is page 450. and it's the third paragraph down. Let's see. Protecting life, conscience, and bodily integrity. Well, let's read the whole thing. The Secretary should pursue a robust agenda to protect the fundamental right to life, protect conscience rights, and uphold bodily integrity rooted in biological realities, not ideology. I'm sorry, what? That is an ideology. That's an ideology. Who wrote this thing? Are we just stupid or what? Like, do they just think they're writing just stupid people? That's an ideology, that you should protect life. I mean, why are we not acknowledging that? Frankly, I think it's the correct ideology, but I'm not going to deny that it is an ideology. From the moment of conception, every human being... Okay, so then you go on to describe your ideology. Good grief. From the moment of conception, every human being possesses inherent dignity and worth. That is an ideology that you're positing. And our humanity does not depend on our age, stage of development, race, or abilities. Right there. That is a premise that is being laid out as an ideology. The Secretary must ensure that all HHS programs and activities are rooted in a deep respect for innocent human life from day one until natural death. Abortion and euthanasia are not healthcare. Agreed. Not that I agree with healthcare anyway, but yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly wanting to pay for people's, any of it. A robust respect for the sacred rights of conscience, both at HHS and among governments and institutions funded by it, increases choices for patients and program beneficiaries and furthers pluralism and tolerance. The Secretary must protect American civil rights by ensuring that HHS programs and activities follow the latter and spirit of religious freedom and conscience protection laws. I don't know what a conscience protection law is. Radical actors inside and outside government are promoting harmful identity politics that replaces biological sex with subjective notions of gender identity and bases a person's worth on his or her race, sex, or other identities. Okay, so what they're doing here is they're trying to make paganism the enemy. And although I agree with some of the things that are being said. No one should be teaching kids about gender identity and their stupid delusional ideas that they have around that are informed by the spirit occupying them. That should not be. But I want you to remember what I said in the first video and what I've repeated to you, that there is blatant hypocrisy that God has exposed. 2 years ago, there was all of this emphasis on wokeism and the craziness of wokeism and everything else, okay? And so part of what they're claiming here without actually laying it out is that no one should be pushing these ideologies on anybody. And I agree with that. No one should be pushing these ideologies on anybody. But next year, they are going to be pushing their own ideologies on people. And God is going to expose that hypocrisy for what it is. Here's what's interesting to me. Listen to what this statement says. Radical actors inside and outside government are promoting harmful identity politics that replaces biological sex with subjective notions of gender identity. Now, harmful identity politics, okay? How about your religious identity? How about defining what it means to be a Christian? That you have to stay within this box, otherwise your identity is no longer Christian, but terrorist. Now you've crossed the line. How about that? And here's what I think is noteworthy here is that there's nothing here about religion. I mean, they've been talking about religious freedom, but they define religious freedom to not have to feed into these ideologies. But there will be other ideologies that they're going to introduce, guys. And those you will have to fall in line with or be killed. And when it's pointed out to them, do you think that they're going to go, yeah, I guess you're right. We are doing the same thing as the pagans. No, they're going to think they're going to be, self-righteous about it, just like they are right now. And they're going to claim to be doing a service to God. That's what Jesus told us in the book of John. The very people who kill you will claim to be doing a service to God. So do you see that in this sentence? So let me read it again. Radical actors inside and outside government. So radical actors, these are radical actors now, but the very people saying this are going to be the radical actors next year. Radical actors inside and outside government are promoting harmful identity politics that replace biological sex with subjective notions of gender identity and bases a person's worth on his or her race, sex, or other identities. Okay, so a lot of these things sound like a lamb or look like a lamb, but speak like a dragon, right? So in public education, which if I had it to do over again, I would never have sent my daughter to go be educated by someone else. Like, I don't want anybody teaching my daughter anything. I don't want them around her. I don't want them coveting the role that God gave me. And I certainly don't want the 10 commandments being hung up in that room and somebody else teaching my child about Christianity. Because the likelihood is that they're not going to teach them correctly. They're going to teach them about counterfeit Christianity, and that's going to be really hard to wash out of them. Has that not been the case for you? It's very hard to come out of Babylon because Babylon's got to come out of you. All of that falsehood has to come out of you. So the idea is that it's okay for them to indoctrinate, but it's not okay for anybody else to indoctrinate. And fundamentally, that's not religious equality, and it's also not religious freedom in a way. So they haven't really defined what religious freedom is. Should you be free to practice your own religion? Yes. Should you be free to impose that on somebody else who is not accepting the message that you're giving them? Absolutely not. And Jesus would not have taught that. He did not teach that, as a matter of fact. What he taught his disciples was go to each door, go to a home. If their peace is deserving, then let your peace rest on them. And if it's not, dust your feet and protest against them. It's going to be worse for them on the day of judgment than it will be for Sodom and Gomorrah, Tyre, and Sidon. He never said, set up these institutions and create a definition that you're going to force on people. So now listen to what the hypocrites say. This destructive dogma, under the guise of equity, threatens Americans' fundamental liberties as well as the health and well-being of children and adults alike. Isn't that exactly what they're doing right here in saying religious freedom and implying that there is religious equity, that there is religious equality under what they're proposing? I mean, that is blatant hypocrisy. You can see it right now. So it's okay for you to impose all of these other ideologies, which you said were not ideologies, but hello, it's an ideology that you are imposing on other people. It is a premise grounded in particular ideology. You know, even in our Declaration of Independence, to say like all men are created equal, that's an ideology. Some people don't believe that. Hindus don't believe that. They believe in a caste system. They don't even take care of their own people because of their ideology that not everyone was born equal. So that is a fundamental ideology that you're planting in there. So it's pretty incredible that they would say this, that they would claim that the pagans were doing this under the guise of equity, and that it threatened Americans' fundamental liberties as well as their health and the well-being of children and adults alike. Well, what happens when you're being forced to fall in line with a particular definition of what it means to be Christian? What happens when you are being forced by the false prophet to worship this image of the Antichrist, and you're not allowed to say anything to the contrary of what it is that they're doing? Or regarding what it is that they're doing, you're not allowed to contradict the narrative that they have put out, that they are victims, that they are the chosen people, that they are allowed to sodomize, rape, kill, and steal in the name of God. Personally, I find that very offensive. I find it incredibly offensive because I believe in the Bible. And so to have these different groups of people who are saying whatever it is they're saying about this, how they're going to bear the covenant for us and they're going to be persecuted by the Antichrist on our behalf, and this is the chosen people. I find it deeply offensive. But I'm also not saying, well, you're not allowed to say that or you need to be jailed. That is what they are saying. That is also what Hillary Clinton has recently been saying. That if you say anything in contradiction to what the establishment has basically laid out, jail them all. Everybody's going to be jailed. That's not equity, guys. But see, as long as you depersonalize certain groups by calling them terrorists and drumming up these hateful, maligning narratives, then everybody else thinks that you don't deserve equity. So you don't even get to argue that. You don't deserve equality and you don't deserve equity because of the things that you're saying, because of the things that you believe. Doesn't that contradict religious freedom? If that's what I truly believe, why am I not allowed to say it? I live in a country where my constitution says that I'm allowed to say anything. I'm allowed to say whatever it is that I want, even if it's not true. That's inherently what free speech is. But the fact that what I'm saying is true and I'm showing you where these things are in the Bible should mean even more. All right, I'm going to pause there. I've given you a little food for thought. I'm going to pray about whether to go through the rest of the document, if there's anything else in here that God really wants me to take a look at or direct your attention to. But I think that I have adequately kind of laid out a lot of the hypocrisy and the inconsistencies in this document. Not just inconsistencies within the document, but inconsistencies when you take the document and you compare it to the fruit of the people who are putting this out. These concepts are very, very vague, and they're vague for a reason, because there's going to be more tightening up around the definitions of what religious freedom means and who it excludes, basically. There's not going to be equal religious freedom for everyone. And also, another thing that I want to say is I've heard Donald Trump talk about this. I've heard him say stuff like this in interviews more recently, even about religious freedom, and saying that there will be religious freedom for everybody. So the fact that he says he knows nothing about this document, I don't know anything about it. It has some good things, it has some bad things. Well, how do you know that? If you don't know anything about it, that's weird. Aren't these your supporters? I mean, if someone were writing in my name and claiming that this is what I'm going to do when I get into presidency, or that, associating me at all, and that wasn't true, I'd be denouncing them. I would be telling them, you better knock it off. He hasn't done that, and he hasn't denounced them in any of his interviews, so I have only to assume that the fruit of what he has spoken and what he has expressed are his beliefs. If they're consistent with this document, then he probably does know a little more than he's leading on. Again, I want to remind you, I don't vote. I'm not encouraging you to vote, because we were never supposed to have a human king. Here's what I am encouraging you to do. Return to God. He's your king. Return to God. And please return to him and discern the things I've talked about in this video.